I've walked through hundreds of fires in my life, but none of them burned me the way that scene did on my daughter's wedding night. Just 4 hours after their sacred vows, my son-in-law left Eleanor alone and slipped down into the wine cellar, the one place no one is allowed to enter, and then standing there in that dim hallway, I heard sounds no father should ever have to hear. But before I go on, thanks for being here listening to my story. Hit subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from in the comments. My name is George Sterling, a retired firefighter who's lived his whole life with smoke fire and promises kept by honor. My daughter Eleanor is the softest thing in this hard world of mine. And Marcus Thorne, the man I tried to trust with her future, carried something in his eyes I could never quite name. From the moment I stepped into that chapel, I knew something was off. I remember Marcus at the altar holding Eleanor's hand, saying all the tender vows any father would want to hear. But it wasn't his words that chilled my spine. It was his eyes. They didn't rest on my daughter's face. They slid past her shoulder and lingered just a heartbeat too long on Sandra the bridesmaid. The way he tightened his grip on Eleanor for a second, then let go like he'd touched something that didn't belong to him, made every fatherly instinct in me curl up in warning. The chapel glowed bright that day, but inside me was a quiet, creeping shadow I couldn't shake. I'd saved my whole life for that wedding, $250,000. Some people would call it crazy, but to me it was a promise to my daughter. When she started her new life, I'd place the honor of our family beneath her feet so she could stand strong. I fixed every door in that mansion by hand, polished each chair, even built an extra wooden frame to hang the chandelier. Just like the one she'd sketched in her childhood diary. All of it. So her marriage would begin in light, not darkness. But that night during the dinner reception, the light started to flicker. I was making my way around the ballroom, picking up a few spilled glasses. Old habits die hard. When I looked up, I saw Marcus and Sandra standing a little too close in the corner. It wasn't small talk between a bridesmaid and a groom. Marcus's face was tight as a pulled wire. Sandra kept glancing around like she was afraid someone might see. When I walked toward them, they snapped apart like two kids caught doing something they shouldn't. Marcus forced a smile. "Father-in-law, you got us. We were just talking about the speech." Sandra nodded way too quickly, without once meeting my eyes. I didn't say a word, but inside I felt like I was standing in an old house with exposed wiring, quiet, but dangerous. I thought it would end there. I told myself I was just being too protective like any father on his daughter's wedding day. But around midnight, just after Eleanor changed out of her dress and was about to head to the honeymoon suite, Marcus walked into the living room with a tense face and an old leather case I'd never seen before. Not a work bag, not a travel bag, a case for documents or secrets. "I have to leave right now," Marcus said, not even looking at Eleanor. "There's an emergency meeting with the advocacy group in New York." Eleanor froze. "Right now, on our wedding night, I'm sorry," he said, though his voice didn't carry a single drop of regret. "I can't turn it down." I was standing by the stairs. I couldn't believe the way he said it, like my daughter was nothing more than a time slot he had to rearrange. Eleanor swallowed her disappointment, trying to stay strong. She dreamed of that night since she was a little girl, playing bride in our backyard. All she managed to whisper was, "Be careful." Marcus turned away, clutching that case. When he passed me, his breath was oddly sharp, and he didn't dare meet my eyes. That wasn't the look of a man heading to a meeting. It was the look of someone running from something, or running towards something he'd been waiting for. The front door shut behind him. His car rolled out of the driveway, sounding like a punch to the chest. I looked up at the balcony where Eleanor stood silent. Her shoulders trembled, but she still forced a small smile, trying to tell me not to worry. I couldn't admit that my gut was a storm of dread. I just nodded quietly and went into my study, hoping morning would fix everything. But deep down, I knew a wedding night never begins with a lie. unless it's going to end with a harsher truth. And I, someone who has watched houses crumble right in front of me, felt it clearly. Something was already cracking beneath the foundation of the life my daughter had just stepped into. I tried to force myself to sleep after Marcus left the estate, but the unease sat on my chest like a slab of stone. The house was too quiet that night. Quiet in a way that didn't fit a wedding, but felt more like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. I lay back in the old armchair by the study window, listening to the wind tapping softly against the frame. I must have closed my eyes for just a few minutes before a strange sound snapped them open. It was around 1:30 in the morning. An engine rumbled in the backyard, low familiar. I'd heard that sound dozens of times during the wedding prep week. It was Marcus's car. But why? Was he coming in from the back? He never used that road. The back path only led to the wine cellar and the storage shed. Places everyone knew I kept the things that meant the most to me. Places no one entered without me. The door was always locked, and I was the only one with the key. I stood up slowly, afraid even my breathing might disturb the raw wound in my chest. As I stepped into the long hallway, I heard footsteps, soft, cautious. Not the steps of a man coming home to apologize to his wife. The steps of someone who didn't want to be seen. I held my breath and moved toward the kitchen. The lights were off. The hall was dark. Only a thin wash of moonlight spilled in through the glass door. And then I saw the door to the wine cellar. Slightly open. Not just unlocked. Pried open. The old brass lock had been nudged aside as if someone had forced it quietly and didn't care about the marks they left behind. My heart dropped all the way to my stomach. A father can endure a lot, but the moment he realizes his daughter is being betrayed inside his own home on her wedding night, that's the moment every vein in his body turns to ice. I placed my hand on the wooden door. Voices drifted up from below, muffled close together. Two people, speaking as if their lips were inches apart. Marcus was down there. But why the cellar? And who was he speaking to? I leaned in, pressing my ear against the crack. Marcus's voice shaking slightly, but not from the cold. I can't do it. Eleanor is too fragile. You know that. I don't love her. I froze. Every word felt like hot oil poured straight into my ears. I'd heard men confess things at the edge of life and death, but never this kind of confession so cruel it made my hands clench on instinct. I only married her because of the arrangement. You already know that. Arrangement I didn't understand. But before I could think, another voice floated up softer, closer, and it cut deeper. I knew you'd come back to me. Sandra's voice. The entire house spun. Sandra, Eleanor's best friend since high school. The girl who used to call me her second dad. The girl I trusted like my own. And now she was beneath my feet, wrapped in the arms of the man who just vowed his life to my daughter. I don't know how long I stood there. Every second felt like someone tightening a rope around my throat. But I knew one thing clearly: I couldn't let rage drown me. I was a firefighter. I'd seen men lose everything because they let fury lead. I had to stay steady enough to protect Eleanor. I stepped back into the shadows, and maybe that saved me, because when Marcus turned on a flashlight and climbed up, he didn't see me. He moved fast. Too fast. Like he was fleeing from what he'd just done. He dropped something on the stairs but didn't stop to pick it up. He just slammed the door and slipped out through the back. A moment later, his car roared off again, this time for good. Only then did I push open the cellar door. The dim yellow light fell over the old wooden steps. The air was cold, but not as cold as the inside of my chest. On the floor right where Marcus had been standing lay a silk handkerchief, pale cream, lace-trimmed edges. A single hand-stitched initial in the corner, S.H. Sandra Hollis. I picked it up. My fingers shook, not from the chill, but from the clarity. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was proof. The kind of proof that could destroy my daughter if I didn't act fast. I stood in that cellar surrounded by a lifetime of memories and realized Eleanor's wedding night had just been burned to ash by a man who didn't deserve her and a friend who never loved her. As I walked back up the hallway, a tiny sob drifted from the bedroom upstairs. My daughter was still waiting for her husband, still believing his promise, still clinging to the night she'd dreamed of since childhood. I looked down at the silk handkerchief in my hand, and I knew that when dawn came, nothing would ever be the same. I had to protect Eleanor at any cost. Any cost. That morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, but Eleanor's room was wrapped in a heavy, breathless silence, nothing like the joy from the day before. I walked up the stairs and saw my daughter sitting perfectly still on the bed, her wedding dress still on her, as if it had never left her body. Her face was empty, her eyes unfocused, staring somewhere far away, trying to gather the pieces of a memory that had shattered overnight. She didn't shed a single tear, but I could feel the storm raging inside her. My chest tightened, anger, helplessness, and grief twisting through every muscle. I didn't shout. I didn't ask questions. A man who's witnessed enough tragedies in the fire service knows yelling never eases pain like this. I just walked over, laid a hand on her shoulder, and felt her fragile tremble beneath my palm. Eleanor looked up at me, just a flicker of hope in her eyes. A hope that her dad would take care of this. And I knew. I had to act. I sat at my desk, picked up my phone, and called our family attorney. My voice was low, firm. Prepare an annulment under Clause 4A, severe breach of trust. We're not waiting for sunrise. He understood immediately. This wasn't just about emotion anymore. This was about my daughter's rights, her dignity, her future. I would not allow her to be deceived for another second. By 4 a.m, everything was ready. I opened the living room doors, warm yellow light stretching across the wooden floor where Marcus and Sandra had been summoned. Marcus walked in panic, plastered all over his face, stumbling over excuses. But I didn't need to argue. I placed the silk handkerchief with the SH embroidery on the table and met his eyes. In that moment, Marcus realized every secret he thought he'd buried was already in my hands. Power settled over me, slow, controlled cold. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I let the truth speak for itself. Sandra stood beside him, flustered and pale. She knew the game was over, and in her eyes I saw the sharp edge of fear, the kind no amount of money could soothe. Both of them knew my daughter's honor was the only thing that mattered now. Then Eleanor came downstairs. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Slowly, she slid the wedding ring off her finger, her hands shaking but steady at the same time. My dad spent $250,000 on this honor. She said, voice calm, cold, and incredibly strong. You're worth $0. She set the ring on the table and turned away. I watched her, saw a blend of heartbreak and raw strength rising inside her. This was the moment she stopped being the girl who was betrayed and became the woman who reclaimed her worth. I picked up the ring and crushed it in my fist. The metal cracked, falling to the floor with a hard, echoing clink. This is all that's left of your vows, I said, my voice low but absolute. I handed Marcus the annulment papers. Sign. His hands shook violently as he scribbled his name, knowing this wasn't just the end of a marriage, but the collapse of whatever grand plan he thought he had. I felt the weight of the moment dignity restored truth laid bare, but also a loss no father could ever fully mend. Eleanor stood beside me, fingers clenched, exhaling a long, trembling breath, like shackles had finally fallen away. When everything was done, I stepped into the hallway and watched Marcus and Sandra leave without a word. No yelling, no threats, just the truth, and the strength of a father who refused to let his child be hurt anymore. I turned back to my daughter and saw something new in her eyes, an emerging power, a clarity she'd never had before. She'd learned something priceless. Her worth was never meant to sit beneath someone else's feet. and betrayal, no matter how cruel, could be survived. I sat beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder again. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady, warm, unwavering. "I'll always protect you, but now you're stronger than you've ever been." She looked at me, eyes misty, and a small, confident smile appeared for the first time since that ruined wedding night. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a new Eleanor, one who could stand tall and choose her own life with her own strength. I picked up the embroidered handkerchief, held it for a long moment, not as something to fuel anger, but as a reminder vigilance and courage are how we protect the people we love. The wedding night ended in silence, but the light of justice and dignity had begun to rise from within my daughter. And in that moment, I understood. A father's job isn't just to guide his child through joy, but to teach her how to stay standing when the world collapses around her. Once Eleanor steadied herself, slipped off that wedding ring, and walked away, I knew the confrontation had only just begun. A father doesn't stop at witnessing betrayal. Justice has to be carried out. I stepped into my office, grabbed my phone, and called a few old colleagues from the fire department and the public service associations I'd once worked with. My voice was low and steady. There's something people need to know. A man's dishonesty in his private life can shake his entire career and his reputation. Help me bring the truth into the light. Within just a few hours, the news spread faster than I expected. Word about Marcus Thorne, once known as a talented lobbyist, was now everywhere tied to accusations of deceit and moral betrayal. I didn't have to threaten anyone. His business partners pulled their contracts on their own, and within 2 days, Marcus lost every lobbying deal he had with the senator, an estimated loss of more than $15 million. He watched his career collapse, eyes blank, just like the way he'd looked at Eleanor on their wedding night. Except this time he couldn't run. Sandra, the bridesmaid who thought everything was just some harmless game, paid her price too. Her secret actions came to light, and the charity she'd worked at for years fired her on the spot. I didn't feel joy, but I did feel relief. When you see betrayal face the justice it deserves, it isn't personal revenge. It's balance being restored to the values that were broken. Eleanor didn't just witness Marcus and Sandra fall. She found her own strength. We sat together in the living room, morning light shining through the windows, making the dew on the grass outside shimmer like tiny sparks of hope. I handed her the honor compensation she was owed from the annulment agreement, enough to reassure her she wasn't abandoned or worthless. But Eleanor didn't keep it for herself. She set aside $100,000 to start a fund for women going through emotional abuse divorces, helping them reclaim their dignity and inner strength. I looked at my daughter and saw maturity and determination burning in her eyes. She had turned pain into purpose, hurt into strength that could lift others. That was my proudest moment, not because Marcus or Sandra fell, but because Eleanor chose the right path for herself. We spent the next few days clearing away the pieces left from that disastrous wedding night. Not just broken things like the ring or the shaken wine cellar door, but trust and dignity that had been tested. I taught Eleanor that sometimes justice doesn't need shouting or violence. It needs firmness, intelligence, and patience. She learned to look truth in the eye, handle everything with courage and clarity, instead of falling into despair. One afternoon, Eleanor sat in the garden with a warm cup of tea, sunlight dancing on the leaves above. She said, her voice calm and steady, "Dad, I know no one can humiliate me ever again, and if anyone tries, I'll protect myself the way you protected me." I smiled, eyes stinging. Every father wants his child to be strong, but watching Eleanor grow strong enough to help others, that's the greatest happiness of my life. And in that moment, I realized something. A father's role isn't just to protect his child in dangerous moments. It's to teach her how to stand tall when everything around her collapses. I didn't need to solve every problem for her. I needed to give her the strength to close any door that didn't respect her. She learned that. And now she wasn't the girl who'd been betrayed. She was a woman who knew how to defend her dignity, restore her honor, and pass that strength on to others. In silence, I placed the silk handkerchief embroidered with the initials S.H. into the safe not to hold on to hatred, but to remind Eleanor of the night she reclaimed her self-worth. That handkerchief would stand as proof of strength, clarity, and a father who protected his daughter not just with muscle but with wisdom, resolve, and the deepest love. As I watched Eleanor, I knew every wound had turned into strength, every pain into a lesson, and her new life began right there from that chaotic wedding night. Everything had been settled, justice, dignity, and power, and now Eleanor was ready to move forward, stronger than anyone who ever tried to hurt her. 2 years passed since that wedding night. Eleanor had become a strong, steady woman walking through every storm life threw her way. One early autumn afternoon, she met Elijah, a gentle history professor whose eyes and voice carried a calm she'd never known before. No grand gestures, no big promises, just respect, patience, and the sense of safety she'd been searching for all her life. I stood at a distance watching, and I realized, this time I didn't need to investigate or worry. This time my daughter had chosen happiness for herself. People often think a father's job is to hand his daughter over to someone else, and that his responsibility ends there. But I learned something different. A father's real duty isn't to hand her over. It's to teach her how to close any door that doesn't honor her. Eleanor learned that well. She knew how to stand tall in the face of injustice, how to use reason and compassion to protect her dignity, and how to turn her pain into something that could help others. I still kept the silk handkerchief embroidered with the initials SH in the safe, not to feed old anger, not to reopen bitterness, but to remind Eleanor of the night she reclaimed her self-worth. That handkerchief had become a symbol of strength, clarity, and a priceless lesson. Dignity and honor can't be taken from you if you know how to hold on to them. Eleanor didn't need rescuing anymore. She needed support, trust, the space to face life on her own terms. And I, as her father, learned to stand beside her, not hovering, not interfering, but ready to act if injustice ever crossed the line again. I smiled as I watched her talking with Elijah, her smile soft and genuine, a smile born not from status, money, or power, but from true peace inside her. If you're a parent, you'll understand this feeling. The greatest happiness isn't shielding your child from every danger. It's teaching them how to rise, how to find their own light in the dark. And Eleanor did exactly that. I closed the living room door gently, leaving Eleanor in the warm glow of the afternoon. The wedding night, the embroidered handkerchief, the whispers in the dark, the cruel betrayal, they were all memories now. Heavy memories, yes, but powerful ones that taught my daughter about strength, patience, and self-respect. That story had ended, but its message lived on. My daughter didn't need saving. She only needed the support to become the woman she was meant to be. If you've ever been through something like this, you'll understand. And if this story awakens some hidden strength in you or in someone you love, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I read every story. And who knows? Maybe yours will inspire someone else just as Eleanor found her way back to herself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it brought you inspiration, clarity, or the strength to stand firm through hardship, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next heartfelt real-life story. Thank you for staying with us.